Well, those of you who were with us the whole time, you remember we started Wednesday night with Daniel 2 and 7. And then last night we looked at Daniel 8 and 9, which we saw go together. And tonight we're going to look at this key pattern in both Daniel and Revelation of the deadly wound, the wound healed, and then going into perdition. Um, you know, I have learned that when it comes to religion, it's not safe to take sides politically. It's okay to have political opinions, personal political opinions, but when it comes to religion, when we take sides politically, we tend to develop blind spots that prevent us from seeing the weaknesses and the pitfalls of our side, whichever that may be. So, as a pastor, I don't want to side with the donkey or the elephant. My hope is in Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. The United States, the lamb-like beast, Revelation 13, began with a Protestant and Republican form of government. Now, that does not mean that the United States started out as a Christian nation, but it was a Protestant and Republican form of government. Now, what do we mean by that? The Constitution of the United States is built on these two principles. Number one, a country without a king. That means the people govern themselves, the Republican part of it, under the rule of law. That's republicanism. And number two, a church without a pope. That means separation of church and state, and that is Protestantism, the influence of Protestantism in the principles of our Constitution. And the First Amendment to the Constitution says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. But prophecy foretells a time when our beloved country will repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican form of government. The lamb-like beast of Revelation 13 speaks like a dragon, using lawlessness and force to achieve its goals. And our country will eventually do away with the principle of separation of church and state, and it will build an image to the beast, the papal power, this image will act just like the little horn papal power of the church of the Middle Ages. Have you heard of the 2025 project? During the election last year, our president did his best to distance himself from Project 2025 because he feared that connections with the 2025 project might hurt him politically. And critics of Project 2025 have described it as an authoritarian Christian nationalist movement that seeks to reform the United States into an autocracy. And since the election, during the first 100 days of President Trump's presidency, many of the parts of Project 2025 have already been implemented and at an alarming rate. But my concern this evening is not primarily with President Trump, but with Christians in America today that are putting their efforts toward getting political power for the church. As we said last night, there's a growing worldwide movement called Christian nationalism, which is looking to bring revival and reformation through political power for the Church of Christ. It is a political ideology that merges American identity with a specific form of Christian identity. And here in the United States, Christian nationalism says that we began as a Christian nation, and in order to reach our God-given destiny, we need to get back to that. It advocates for the government to take steps to promote Christian values and pass laws reflecting those Christian values. But Jesus told Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight. A dear friend asked the question a few months ago, has the church fallen asleep to great sins? Talking about abortion and LGBTQ and other things like that. Have the church fallen asleep to great sins because we are just looking for prophecy to be fulfilled? Well, this is a very important question that deserves a clear answer. As the Israel of God in the last days of Earth's history, we find ourselves caught between Egypt and Babylon. Egypt says, who is God that I should obey his voice? I don't recognize him or his authority. Remember, Egypt in the days of Israel was in the south, and Babylon was in the north. But after the cross, these are worldwide, and the king of the south is secularism, and the king of the north is the religious powers. And Egypt rose up in the French Revolution, symbolic Egypt, not literally Egypt, but Egypt, secularism rose up in the French Revolution and administered the deadly wound to the church, which had become Babylon and had been oppressing God's people. And Egypt now has once again been pushing at Babylon with anti-God philosophies and immorality of all kinds abounds. But now Babylon is pushing back, claiming to be the champion of righteousness and looking for political power to bring us back to God and enforce her decrees by legislation. Religious oppression will inevitably be the result. Babylon will use deception to bring the world under her umbrella, even calling fire down from heaven. When did that happen? Well, two places. Elijah called fire down from heaven, and the revival that took place in Israel, coming back from Baal worship to serve the living God. And then the fire came down from heaven at Pentecost, the Pentecostal fire of revival and reformation. And so Babylon will use deception to bring the world under her umbrella, even calling fire down from heaven and working all kinds of miracles. So what do God's people do when we find ourselves caught between Egypt and Babylon? We keep the commandments of God and we have the faith of Jesus. We call people to faith that works by love and enables them to obey all of God's commandments. And at the same time, we warn them about the deceptions of Babylon and her attempts to rule the world through political power. And as a result, we will be considered enemies of both sides. Enemies of Egypt because their sins are exposed. And we will be accused of being in league with Egypt on Egypt's side of everything because we oppose Babylon, the supposed champion of righteousness, who is set to oppose everyone who does not go along with her agenda. So in response to my friend, I said, let's not allow ourselves to be distracted by any of Satan's deceptions or distractions because he's working both sides. And let us do what our Lord has called us to do, to call people to have faith in the faith of Jesus and to keep his commandments, and at the same time warn against the inroads and deceptions of Babylon. So I appealed to my friend, let's work together to give that message to the world. If you'd like to learn more about American Christian nationalism, there's much more that we don't have time to go into today, but I recommend two books. The Violent Take It by Force by Matthew D. Taylor, and The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory by Tim Alberta. And I've given links to these two books in Amazon.com to Pastor Jude, along with the handouts that I have been using. And you can get those from him just by indicating that you would like to have them sent to you. So let's take a look at this pattern in Bible prophecy, because this pattern in Bible prophecy has everything to do with what's happening in the world today and the inroads of American Christian nationalism, because we see the deadly wound being healed. So today, the deadly wound and a battle won, the pattern of prophecy. At the center of Bible prophecy is the story of a little king who speaks great words against the Most High and persecutes his holy ones and intends to change God's times and laws. He's allowed to oppress God's people for 1,260 years, but he receives a deadly wound, which is healed. And then in his final attack upon God's people, he comes to his end with none to help him, and God's people are rescued and vindicated and receive the kingdom, which will never be destroyed. In a nutshell, that's the message concerning the little horn, which is the center of Daniel and the focus of Daniel and Revelation. Jesus himself is actually the center of the whole thing, but also the little horn power is also this center. And so this pattern that we're looking at, this three-part pattern, helps us to bring everything into focus and keep it simple. It's easy to think, when you try to understand Daniel or Revelation with so many different symbols, it's too complicated, it's too difficult to understand. But I found when you realize that the message is basically all about the same thing, that there's this unifying principle and pattern, prophecy comes into focus and begins to make more sense. The basic pattern is very simple. Evil receives a deadly wound. The deadly wound is healed, and evil is finally defeated. Actually, this is following after the pattern of Christ, who received a deadly wound, but that deadly wound was healed, and he is alive forevermore and interceding for us. And it's important that we understand this pattern, because this evil, the dragon, Paul says the devil is going about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He has us in his crosshairs, and he's determined to defeat us. But Jesus has already won the victory. Amen? And those who are with him in the final battle are guaranteed victory. So let's take a look. The pattern is found once in Daniel and 3 times in Revelation. And I don't expect you to fully understand every detail here. We're going to be not going to get down in the details like we said before in studying these prophecies. We're flying over the trees. We're seeing the things from the top. I just want you to recognize this pattern. We're living during the time when this deadly wound is being healed. And the United States of America is right in the middle of the healing of this wound. So first, we're going to take care of the first part where we find this pattern is Daniel 11, verses 40 through 45. But before we get to Daniel 11, we just want to briefly review what we have studied over the past 2 days in Daniel 2, 7, and 8, and 9. In Daniel 2, we find the basic outline of all prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream an image representing the nations from his day down to the end of time: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the divided kingdom of European civilization. And then a stone is cut out without hands, which represented God's kingdom, which will never be defeated. It strikes the image on its feet and it becomes a mountain and fills the whole universe. And then in Daniel 7 and 8, we found the same pattern. 7 and 8 are parallel prophecies. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the divided kingdom of European civilization, and then God's kingdom comes at the very end. And then a new element was introduced, this little horn, which grows out of this dragon beast in Daniel 7, and the goat horn of Daniel 8, and eventually becomes the final church state power just before Jesus returns. Then comes the fourth parallel prophecy in Daniel 10 and 11. We had Daniel 2, 7, 8, and 9, and then comes the parallel to it in Daniel 10 and 11. The conspicuous horn that we have circled in red over here on the Greek goat of Daniel 8 is that the mighty king of Daniel 11, verse 3, Alexander the Great. And then the kingdom of Greece is divided into four: in the north and the south, the east and the west. And these corresponded to the four generals of Alexander the Great. So there were these four horns that came to all the compass points. And they quickly morph into two: the king of the north and the king of the south. Seleucus was the general in the north, and Ptolemy was the general in the south. And eventually, these two become Rome in the north and Egypt in the south. And then after the cross, what is local and literal becomes universal, worldwide, and spiritual. After the cross, Rome becomes papal Rome, and Egypt becomes secularism, saying, "Who is God that I should acknowledge him?" And so that is all background for Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45. It says there in Daniel 11, verse 40, at the time of the end, and when is the time of the end? That means 1798. That's the year that the time of the end events began. At the time of the end, the king of the south will wage war with him, the king of the north. So here's the first element in the pattern. In 1798, in the French Revolution, the powers of secularism in France arose to give the papacy a deadly wound. There's the first part of the three-part pattern. And then the second part of the pattern follows. The deadly wound is healed. It says, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots and horsemen and with many ships, and he will enter the countries and overflow them and pass through. We're living during that time, just before that is really completely taking place. Then the king of the north even invades the glorious land, God's land, spiritual Israel. Now we're talking about not literal Israel in the Middle East. We're talking about spiritual Israel worldwide. This king of the north invades God's God's realm worldwide. He will also enter the glorious land, and many countries will fall. Daniel 11, verse 41. And then in verse 44, he makes a final attack against God's people, and the glorious land is in focus. The king of the north makes a final attack upon God's people. It says, but rumors from the east and the north will disturb him. That's the three angels' message. Here's the rumors from the east and the north. They're going to disturb the king of the north, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. Verse 44. So Babylon receives a deadly wound. The deadly wound is healed, and finally Babylon is defeated. And it pictures that defeat. In the next verses, in verse 45, it says, he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion. Here he is. He's pitching his tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. In the time of Israel, literal Israel, there was Mount Zion, and then over on the west was the Mediterranean Sea. And if you were attacking, you might be camped there between the Mediterranean and the Mount Zion. But this time, this is talking about spiritual Israel worldwide. The king of the north will pitch his tents, his royal pavilion, between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end. Keep an eye on that king of the north in the middle there. He will come to his end, and no one will help him. We're going to see this pattern again. It's the basic pattern for Babylon's fall. So we've seen the pattern in Daniel 11. Now let's go to the book of Revelation. The second place that we find this threefold pattern is in the heart of Revelation, the sea beast of Revelation 13. The book of Revelation is built on a menorah pattern. Menorah means lampstand. And it uses this lampstand pattern. There's a central message. That's this central message right here. The fourth branch is the middle branch. And then the third and the fifth are parallel, and they're connected with each other. And then the second and the sixth are parallel, and they're connected to each other. And finally, the first and the seventh are also parallel, and they're connected with each other. The whole book of Revelation is, from chapter 1 to chapter 22, is built on this pattern, this menorah pattern. And everything in Revelation revolves around this end time message found in chapters 12 through 14. It's where we find the three angels' message in the center of the book of Revelation. And the third and the fourth places where we find this threefold pattern, where Babylon is wounded and then healed and then defeated, is found in the seven trumpets and the seven plagues. They're on this, they are connected. Seven trumpets and seven plagues are connected to each other and this menorah pattern. So let's first take a look at this central message in Revelation 12 to 14. Revelation 12, verses 1 to 6 says, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems, and his tail swept away the third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. This is none other than Satan himself. And he works the uh, through the Roman kingdom to attack the baby Jesus when he is born. It says there, and she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. There's our number again, the 1,260 years of Bible prophecy. Also the 42 months and the times and a half a time. Here it is, 1,260 days that the woman is nourished in the wilderness. And then in verse 17, it says, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And so this dragon goes off to make war, but what he does is he goes and he gets 2 helpers to help him in this war, the beast from the sea and the lamb-like beast. So we're looking at the papacy there and America in prophecy. In Revelation 13, 1-4, it says, the beast from this, it says, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. Now that sounds familiar, doesn't it? From Daniel 7, where all those beasts came up out of the sea. Only this time it's one beast coming up out of the sea, composite beast. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And notice that this beast has all the characteristics, all the symbols found in Daniel 7 connected with the little horn. You have the lion, you have the bear, you have the leopard, and you have the 10 horns, and the great dragon, or the fourth beast, all in one picture. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So you see how the more you study it, it's all talking about the same thing. And it becomes simpler when you see all these symbols are just talking about the same thing. Revelation 13, verses 5-7, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. And authority to act for 42 months was given to him. Just like the little horn in Daniel 7, the same thing it's happening here. He acts for 42 months, which is the same as 1,260. And it says authority was given him, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And Revelation 13, verse 3 and 4, we see, he says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain. That's the deadly wound. And his fatal wound was healed. There's part two in the three-part pattern. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast, and they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? And Babylon defeated. So you have the deadly wound healed, and Babylon defeated is implied in verse 10. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. And if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here's the perseverance of the faith of the saints. So here is that threefold pattern. The third place that we find this threefold pattern is in the seven trumpets. Now, in all of Bible prophecy, the seven trumpets are probably the most difficult to decode. But when they are decoded, and we're not going to go into all the detail of decoding it tonight, but when you decode the trumpets, this is what you come out with. The first trumpet is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The second trumpet is the fall of Rome in 476 AD. The third trumpet is the fall of the church in 538 AD. The fourth trumpet is the French Revolution in 1798. The fifth trumpet is the triumph of secularism. Secularism administered the deadly wound in 1798, and then the picture of the triumph of that secularism during the time that I grew up, and most of us grew up during that time. The triumph of secularism from 1798 to the present. And then the sixth trumpet is the age of spiritualism, which is presently ongoing as Babylon prepares for the final battle. And the seventh trumpet is the consummation of all things. That is a very quick review of the seven trumpets. But we want to take a look at this pattern in the trumpets. Hidden in these seven trumpets is this threefold pattern. We find the deadly wound in the fourth and fifth trumpets with the French Revolution and when the forces of secularism arose to administer the deadly wound to the papacy. And then the triumph of secularism, which brings us into our modern world. That's the deadly wound. And we find that same wound is healed in the sixth trumpet. We're entering into the sixth trumpet now, as through spiritualism, Babylon prepares for this final battle of Armageddon. The sixth trumpet talks about 200 million troops, you noticed here, 200 million horsemen, 200 million troops. There are only two places where John says, I heard the number. In Revelation 9, verse 6, right here, the 200 million, he says, I heard the number. The other place is in Revelation 7, verse 4, the 144,000, and he says, I heard the number. Those are the only two places. And there's a reason for that. Because 200 million is the counterpart of the 144,000. 144,000 symbolically represents God's troops in the final battle, and the 200 million symbolically represent Satan's troop in the final battle. But Babylon is defeated under the seventh trumpet. That's the third part. Deadly wound, wound healed, and Babylon defeated. In the seventh trumpet, the mystery of God is finished, and the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ has come. Your wrath came, the consummation of all things. Babylon receives a deadly wound, and the wound is healed, and then Babylon is defeated when God sets up his everlasting kingdom. So we see this three-part pattern in the trumpets. The final time that we find this threefold pattern is in Revelation 17. The harlot woman and the resurrected beast. This chart shows the connection between the trumpets and the plagues. And you see there's a close connection between the sixth trumpet and the sixth plague. Both of them mention the great river Euphrates, and they both reference spiritualism and the final battle. And then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, one saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the four angels who are bound at the river Euphrates." And the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year were released so that they would kill a third of mankind. And the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. The dragon has his troops and the lamb has his troops. The lamb's troops are mentioned in Revelation 7, verse 4. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. But, we saw that last night that we're not talking about literal Israel. We're talking about God's people from every kindred, tongue, and people, which makes up the spiritual Israel just before Jesus comes. The number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. And I heard the number of them. That is Satan's troops in this final battle. Now we jump over from the sixth trumpet to the sixth plague. And in the sixth plague, we also see the dragon mustering his troops. It says the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water was dried up so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. The kings from the east are the 144,000 that come with Jesus and eventually end up building the New Jerusalem, establishing them as citizens of the New Jerusalem. And I saw, it says in verse 16, verse 13 and 14, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon. See, these are the three parts of Babylon in the end of time. The dragon, which is Satan and his body here on this earth, all the secular powers of the world. And out of the mouth of the beast, that's the papacy. And out of the mouth of the false prophet is the lamb-like beast, Protestant America. There's coming out of those three are three unclean spirits like frogs. Here's the spiritualism of the sixth trumpet. For they are the spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. So here we have the spirits of demons working through the dragon and the beast and the false prophet to gather the world together to fight the final battle. And that final battle is pictured in Revelation 17. In Revelation 17, we find the final appearance of the little horn of Daniel 7. The harlot woman seated on the scarlet beast represents end-time Babylon. The same power that receives the deadly wound, which is healed, and the same power as the king of the north, who finally comes to his end with none to help him. Here is the picture that we find in Revelation 17. The harlot Babylon is seated upon many waters, which are also this scarlet beast. The waters and the beast are the same. And again, we see the great river Euphrates. This scarlet beast represents the great river Euphrates, upon which the ancient city of Babylon was literally built on the Euphrates River. And in Revelation 17:15, we learn that the many waters upon which Babylon sits represents peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. They represent the political support for the apostate religious power during the end times, when church and state are once again united. And the seven heads of this river dragon are situated on seven hills. They are the springs from which the mighty river flows, and they represent the past history of this persecuting beast and all the nations down through history that have persecuted God's people. There are seven great powers which have persecuted God's people down through history: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and Papal Rome. In John's day, it says 5 are fallen, and one that was pagan Rome that was in power in the time of John. And one was yet to come, that would be the papal power that is still to come. And the beast himself is numbered 8, which is the number of resurrection. This beast received a deadly wound, but he's resurrected. And here is where we find our threefold pattern. The beast was and is not, there's the deadly wound, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to perdition, go to destruction. It says in verse 17, verse 8, the inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, is the deadly wound, and yet will come. The beast was and is not, because its seventh head received a deadly wound, but that deadly wound is about to be healed, and he will be resurrected from the abyss. But it will not last long, because he goes to destruction just before Jesus comes. And that destruction is described in verses 15 to 17. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. You see there, the pattern is repeated. The little horn of Daniel 7, the king of the north of Daniel 11, the sea beast of Revelation 13, the kingdom of Satan in the last 4 trumpets in Revelation 8 and 9, and the harlot woman in Revelation 17 riding on the scarlet beast at the very end. It's all Babylon, which receives a deadly wound, which is healed, but comes to her end with none to help her. And we find in verse 14 the final battle against the Lamb and his people. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And we also discovered there is a real deadly wound, and the other deadly wound, the deadly wound that the beast receives, is only a counterfeit. So I saw in the middle of the throne and the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns and 7 heads, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And it's the same word in Revelation 13. A lamb standing as if slain, and I saw one of its heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Jesus said, if I am lifted up on the cross, if I receive a deadly wound, I will draw all the whole world to myself. It says the whole world wondered after the beast, but Jesus said, if I am lifted up, the whole world will be drawn to me. The beast was and is not and goes to perdition. Jesus was and is to come, the Almighty. In these last days, When Christians of America are striving for political power to establish a Christian nation, which prophecy declares will trample upon the freedom of conscience, will you be found true and faithful, following the Lamb wherever he goes? Will you be among those who are the called and the chosen and the faithful? It is my prayer that we all may be among those who are called and chosen and faithful.